I've never considered myself a believer in the paranormal, but what happened to me during a college backpacking trip has stayed with me ever since. It was early April, and the trip was supposed to be a fun weekend escape into nature. There were 7 other students and 2 experienced guides, and we'd planned to hike and camp in Zaleski State Forest, deep in the Appalachian region of Ohio. Even though spring was beginning, the forest felt lifeless. The trees were bare, their skeletal branches casting eerie shadows over the trail. The ground was still damp from lingering winter rains, and patches of mist clung to the low valleys. We were miles from civilization, surrounded by rolling hills and dense woods. The isolation was both thrilling and unsettling. After several hours of hiking, we arrived at a designated campsite. A few other groups were spread out across the area, a couple of older hikers, some families, and 2 college-aged girls who seemed friendly enough. Our group, however, set up camp on the edge of the clearing, right against the tree line, where the forest loomed tall and dark. From the moment we arrived, I felt uneasy. The air seemed heavier, like it carried an electric charge. I couldn't pinpoint why, but the place just felt wrong. Each of us had our own small one-person tent, and we clustered them together for safety. My tent was positioned at the back of the group, closest to the forest. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling as we settled in for the night. By 2 a.m., the camp was silent. The only sounds were the faint rustling of the trees and the occasional hoot of an owl. I had been sleeping soundly when I was jolted awake by the unmistakable crunch of leaves right behind my tent. My body stiffened as I strained to listen. The sound was rhythmic and deliberate, heavy footsteps circling my tent. It wasn't an animal. Deer and other wildlife move lightly, and their steps are erratic. This was something else, something on 2 legs. The footsteps stopped just beside my tent. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my ears. Then I heard it, breathing. It was soft but labored, as if whoever, or whatever, it was had been running or struggling. The sound was close, uncomfortably close, and it sent a wave of dread through me. I didn't dare unzip the tent to look outside. Instead, I stayed perfectly still, hoping whatever it was would go away. But it didn't. The footsteps resumed, circling not just my tent but moving to the others in our group. Every few minutes, they returned to mine, as if the thing was fixated on me. At some point, I noticed a light shining through the fabric of my tent. It was soft and warm, like a faint glow. It wasn't a flashlight, it didn't move or flicker. It seemed to pulse gently, bathing the inside of my tent in an unnatural light. I couldn't make out any shape or figure, but the glow filled me with an overwhelming sense of unease. I wanted to scream or call out to someone, but fear had paralyzed me. Time felt distorted, stretching endlessly as the footsteps continued and the light hovered outside. At some point, sheer exhaustion overtook me, and I must have fallen asleep. When I woke up, it was morning. The forest looked completely ordinary in the daylight, as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the lingering fear. At breakfast, I cautiously brought it up to the group, expecting them to dismiss it as a dream. To my surprise, our trip leader admitted she had also heard the footsteps and strange noises during the night but had been too tired to investigate. Another student mentioned seeing a light, though he assumed it was from another camper. Yet none of us had left our tents or turned on any lights. The rest of the trip was uneventful, but the experience haunted me. I kept replaying the night in my head, trying to rationalize what I'd heard and seen. Maybe it was just a trick of the mind, or maybe there was something in those woods that didn't want us there. I've read stories about the Appalachian region, its history, its mysteries, and the strange things that people have encountered in those forests. I never thought I'd have a story of my own to tell, but now I believe there are places in the world where the veil between the natural and the supernatural is thin. Zaleski State Forest is one of them. My brother, 2 years older than me, has always been my camping buddy. We've spent countless days exploring the outdoors, building forts, creating BMX tracks, hunting, and hiking through dense forests. Since 2016, our adventures have taken us across the US, venturing into deep caves, hiking canyons, and climbing cliffs. There's little I wouldn't face when he's by my side, but this experience was different. It left a mark on both of us, something we still don't talk about much. In 2019, we planned a hunting trip to a forest I knew well. It was probably my 5th time there, but my brother's first. The forest is vast and isolated, with only a few rugged county roads cutting through it, most of them narrow 2-track trails that stretch for miles. We packed up my truck with all the essentials, including 3 tents, 1 for each of us and a 3rd for changing clothes and storing gear. The drive to our campsite was long, with rough, winding trails surrounded by dense trees and brush. By the time we arrived, it was late at night. Exhausted from the journey, we quickly set up camp and fell asleep. The next day was uneventful. We spent hours scouting and tracking before returning to camp in the evening. After a simple dinner, a few drinks, and some conversation, we decided to call it a night. Everything felt normal up to that point. But that night, something woke me, a sharp sound hitting my tent, followed by my brother urgently calling my name. His tone immediately told me something was wrong. I called back, and within moments, he unzipped my tent and stepped inside, visibly shaken. "What's going on?" I asked, but he just grabbed my shoulder and whispered, "Shoo." It was still pitch dark, likely around 4:30 or 5 a.m. We sat in tense silence, trying to make sense of what was happening. Then we heard it, a sound that still baffles me to this day. It started as the faint, distant laughter of a woman, but there was something unnatural about it. The tones shifted rapidly, as if multiple voices were blending together. The laughter came in bursts, separated by brief moments of silence. Then it changed, sharp, high-pitched squeals gave way to low, guttural noises that seemed to vibrate the ground beneath us. I regret not recording it, but at the time, I was too stunned to think clearly. The sounds continued, fluctuating between tones, until the faint light of dawn began to break. I think it lasted about an hour, though it felt much longer. Neither of us spoke a word the entire time. The air around us felt charged, almost like static electricity clinging to my skin. As soon as the sound stopped, rain began to fall. Within minutes, a violent thunderstorm swept through the area. The weather forecast hadn't mentioned any rain for the days we'd planned to be there, yet this storm was like nothing I'd ever experienced while camping. The winds were so intense that they tore out the stakes holding down our tents and gear. We'd hammered those stakes deep into the ground with an axe, and it would have taken immense force to dislodge them. Both of our tents were partially collapsed, their stakes scattered around the campsite. Even now, my brother refuses to talk about that night. He dismisses the sounds as machinery being dragged, but at the time, we both knew it was something else. The fact that we were so far from any town or industrial site only deepens the mystery. Whatever it was, it left us both uneasy, and I can't shake the feeling that we encountered something we weren't meant to. About 3 years ago, in late November, my husband and I had an unsettling experience that still lingers in the back of our minds. At the time, we were living in Seattle and would often spend weekends surfing. Our favorite spots were Knee Bay and Westport, which meant long drives but always rewarded us with great waves. That particular weekend, though, the surf forecast was grim, rough seas and stormy weather along the coast. Disappointed, we decided to look for a safer option and eventually settled on trying a spot along the Strait of Juan de Fuca. The area was breathtakingly remote, with Highway 112 being the only road leading to it. The highway stretched from Port Angeles to Knee Bay, cutting through isolated landscapes with little cell service and only a handful of tiny towns scattered along the way. We chose a spot called Twin, a place we'd surfed at before and felt comfortable with. Since the best waves were forecasted for early the next morning, we decided to head out the night before and sleep in our car by the beach. It was late November, and the cold weather made camping less appealing, so we planned to park by the water and have a quiet night to ourselves. When we arrived around 3:30 p.m., the beach was as empty as we'd expected. The only other people there were a young couple in a camper van. The evening passed uneventfully. After parking, we cooked dinner and enjoyed a short walk along the beach. Just before sunset, though, something strange happened. We heard a loud whistling sound and spotted a man walking down the entrance road toward the beach. What struck us as odd was that he seemed to have come from the highway, a route not typically used by pedestrians since there's nothing nearby. The highway was isolated, with no stops or attractions, so seeing someone on foot was unusual. The man greeted the young couple, who invited him to join their campfire. My husband and I didn't think much of it at the time, and by 8 p.m., we decided to call it a night. An hour later, I woke up and opened the car door slightly to let in some fresh air. To my surprise, the young couple's camper van was gone. A strange sense of unease crept over me, though I couldn't explain why. Shrugging it off as tiredness, I lay back down and tried to sleep. At around 11 p.m., I woke up suddenly, sitting up so quickly that I startled my husband awake. He asked what was wrong, but I couldn't give him an answer. I just felt off. He brushed it off and went back to sleep, but I stayed awake, listening intently. Despite hearing nothing, the unease lingered. Not long after, I woke up again to find my husband already sitting up, completely still and alert. His silence unnerved me, so I switched on the car light and asked what was going on. In a low whisper, he said, "Someone's tapping on the windows." A chill ran down my spine. I didn't hear anything at first, but the look on his face was enough to send my anxiety skyrocketing. We stayed silent, too scared to move, until my husband finally said we needed to check the area. We grabbed flashlights and pepper spray, put on our shoes, and stepped out into the cold, dark night. The beach was eerily quiet, with no sign of movement. My husband decided to check the trees behind us while I stayed by the car, scanning the beach with my flashlight. After a few minutes, he returned, walking quickly and looking alarmed. "We need to leave," he said urgently. "There's a car parked by the exit road. The engine's running, but the lights are off." We didn't waste a second. Grabbing everything from the front seats and throwing it into the back, we started the car and sped toward the exit road. In our rush, my husband accidentally took a wrong turn, heading in the direction of Knee Bay instead of Port Angeles. As we passed the exit road, we saw the car again, but now its headlights were on, and it began speeding up behind us. My heart pounded as it got closer, the narrow highway bordered by dense forest on one side and the ocean on the other. Just ahead, we spotted a small turnout and made a sharp left turn, pulling off the road. To our immense relief, the car following us didn't slow down or turn, it kept driving straight down the highway. We waited a few minutes before continuing our drive, this time heading toward Port Angeles. The tension didn't ease until we were far from the area, and no one else followed us the rest of the way. Even now, the memory of that night gives me chills. I can't shake the feeling of being watched and the unsettling thought of what the person, or people, in that car might have intended.